Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about the film A Dirty Shame from 2004. And this concludes my series where I reviewed every film directed by John Waters, or at least so far. As someone who's now watched and reviewed and made evidence of having seen every John Waters movie and seeing the ebbs and flows of his career, it's kind of interesting on this viewing of A Dirty Shame. I really did not like this movie. I used to like it a lot. I thought it was a real return to form for him after he had done his kind of more, as we'd say, Hollywood stuff. After he'd done Hairspray and kind of the more sweeter stuff and kind of rejected the cult grosser things, that was always something I wanted him to go back towards, especially as I was like in middle school and high school when I was really into John Waters. So him going back to that was kind of the answer to my prayers for all those years and years. And when I first saw it, I thought it was cool he had gone back to it. I thought it was a really great decision for him to do that. But watching it now, it just doesn't really work. And I honestly think it's his worst movie. It's the one I've had the hardest time getting through. Not because of the controversial stuff at all, just because I thought it was really very bad. It was very stupid, and not in the fun way for John Waters, more in just the stupid way. And I think Dirty Shame suffers from a lot of that, and it doesn't really live up to the rest of his filmography. This odd idea to regress right when the Broadway musical of Hairspray was a huge hit, but they were considering making a movie, which they later did, and kind of a way to get back some of that edge, and it feels so pushing that it kind of just feels false in a lot of what it's doing. It feels like pushing the Fairley Brothers style to an nth degree, but also being original John Waters. But it almost made me sick of that style, and I don't think Dirty Shame is bad enough to make me hate the other John Waters movies, but at least makes me hate what his style has become at the end of his filmography. Sylvia, played by Tracy Ullman, who is a stuck-up neuter who very much doesn't like sex and is a prude, even though her daughter Caprice very much loves the attention and loves sex very much, as her alter ego Ursula utters, because she got breast implants to have huge breasts, as she dances at this local bar where she has a big cult following. And Sylvia's kind of just a grump walking around the neighborhood, not really liking anyone or her husband, until she's hit in the head and suddenly her sex drive goes wild and she meets Ray Ray, played by Johnny Knoxville. They realize that she is the divine sex person who's going to invent the new sexual position, and she goes around learning all the different crazy sex acts, and how the Baltimore area near Harford Road is suddenly becoming split into two groups, the perverts and the neuters, as the neuters try to have decency rallies and hold back the perverts who are slowly taking over the neighborhood and embracing all the various strange sex acts that they are into, as Sylvia becomes their poster child and messiah to show that these different sex acts are completely normal and beautiful, and continue the rise of the perverts to take over us all. John Waters, him taking this back, that was kind of the thing. That's the idea that everyone said for a long time for him throughout the 90s. As soon as Hairspray really happened, his older cult stuff was so much cooler and better, and why doesn't he go back to that? And seeing this movie kind of does make me wish he hadn't. I pretty much like most of his movies for the most part, and even the later ones that most people don't like, but this one I kind of agree with the people who dislike it. I don't really think the NC-17 rating, I mean, it hindered it quite a bit. This is kind of a film that hurt him financially in terms of raising money for any future projects, because it was such a bomb. It had a $15 million budget, which is a pretty large budget for him, and only made about 1.9. It was actually the 15th highest grossing NC-17 wide release ever, and third that year. Apparently there were a lot of NC-17 movies in 2004. He claimed that the MPAA gave so many no's that they just stopped taking them, and if they cut it down there'd only be 10 minutes. But then on DVD they released an R-rated cut for Kmart and various department stores, so I'm a little confused on that notion of it. But this film unfortunately has had a pretty lasting legacy on John Waters not being able to make a movie for a long time. It does feel like a natural continuation. The whole neuters versus perverts thing very much falls into the good versus evil, kind of like the establishment, the more conservative people, versus the freaks who are more accepting and love their life and have a real joy to everything. And that's very much something he's had through Pink Flamingos to Hairspray to Cecil B. Demented to Crybaby, that the people from the bad side of the tracks aren't necessarily evil, they're just misunderstood. And that's something he continues through A Dirty Shame. And I can almost understanding seeing that narrative and thinking like, oh wow, that's really great that he's still doing that. This feels like a John Waters movie, but in the way it does, but it kind of grows back to my criticism of serial Serial Mom, in that Serial Mom feels more like a comedy at the time than a John Waters movie. And this feels like a natural melding of a comedy in the early 2000s and a John Waters movie. It even has like CGI squirrels and stuff. It feels very early 2000s, but it doesn't seem to work. It almost feels more Waters than Serial Mom in a lot of ways, but I really don't like that. I wish he had maybe not regressed. It feels like a regression rather than him going forward in his filmography. It was something people were asking for, but the whole sex thing just doesn't really feel as crazy and controversial. This almost feels dated in the 12 years since it's been released, whereas Pink Flamingos feels very current and still as controversial and as cultish and as dangerous as it used to, and A Dirty Shame feels very quaint about like understanding that there's all these crazy different sex acts. Like the thing with the bears and the baby thing feels especially weird and strange. It's still very much a cult movie. I'm glad John Waters is still making very uniquely John Waters films, but it just doesn't feel as groundbreaking and as satirical. It feels very safe, intentionally pushing the boundaries in a way that I don't like, really. It's everything people criticize about John Waters movies that I usually don't agree with, I agree with on A Dirty Shame, because there's a lot of the sex stuff that I'm just like, okay, I guess it's not very funny, it's not very memorable, but like when I look at most of his earlier work, I really like that. And I think the reason is that has a grime and a grit to it and a ridiculousness to it, and I feel like A Dirty Shame really wants to be that. And I know the common thing in almost every review of A Dirty Shame is that he had this hit Broadway musical, he's suddenly starting to become more and more mainstream, this is the most mainstream he ever was in the 2000s, and he has to fight that. I don't know if that's the actual reason artistically. He didn't say that on the commentary. Any interview with the Dreamlanders and on the DVD of this, when they're asked the Dreamlanders, they all were surprised that he's kind of going back to doing that thing again, how they wanted him to do that again. And I think because that had been around for so long and been this kind of shadow over him this whole time, it was something that he felt should happen at a certain point. It's kind of like one of those things that the audience always wants, but then when you give it to them, they're like, oh, I don't know if I actually wanted this. Sorry. You know, in my mind, I had this perfect movie. I don't know what it was, but it's like this thing. It would have been really cool. And sometimes, like, you have to, as an artist, understand what the audience wants versus what it actually needs. And I think this was a complete miscommunication of that. In that, like, if someone told me the idea that this movie was coming out, it was all for it. And when I first saw it, that seemed to be what I liked about it. Maybe it's because I had no real connection to this one. All the 90s ones that I'm kind of giving better reviews to, Pecker, I had a connection to. You know, I saw it with my friends. Serial Mom, I had a connection to. Cecil B. Demented, I was across the street from the premiere or whatever. But like A Dirty Shame, I don't know why I didn't see it in theaters. I don't have a reason for that. I wish I had a specific reason, but I saw it on DVD, I believe, and I don't remember any of it. And all of his movies I remember something from. And I think this just does that kind of early 2000s thing where it's like, oh, there's going to be an unrated DVD and it's so crazy and it's like it'll make you laugh because it's so gross and controversial. And some of those I like, particularly like Anchorman and such, but a lot of that stuff I think is fucking stupid and just isn't very funny and aren't real jokes. This is the film I laughed the least at. Kind of like I like the idea of this. I like that Mink Stole has a big role again. I like things like that. And I like that someone like Johnny Knoxville, like kind of the peak of his fame or around the peak of his fame, let's say, would do something like this, but I just don't like this movie that much. And it's frankly a shame, a dirty shame maybe, that I don't. Johnny Knoxville was a big John Waters fan. John Waters was a big supporter of Jackass the whole time it was on. Johnny Knoxville clearly is a fan of John Waters because he keeps, in every interview for this movie, he keeps talking about how he got to meet Mink Stole, so clearly like he is a fan. I think he got what he was doing with Jackass was similar to what John Waters was doing, as did John Waters. I like that kind of passing the torch on to the next generation, and the next generation kind of helping him out as well. And Johnny Knoxville was part of the reason this even got funding, frankly. I like Tracy Ullman. I think she's kind of perfect. She's kind of the perfect actress for a John Waters movie. I like her performance, frankly. I don't think anyone gives a bad performance. Selma Blair uses her indie kookiness, works very well for a John Waters movie, and particularly for this character. Chris Isaak, who apparently originally Paul Giamatti had the part that Chris Isaak was going to play, but then he had to bow out because he got Sideways, which I think ultimately was a better decision for Paul Giamatti. I think this movie would actually be better with Paul Giamatti. I wish they had kind of worked something out. Part of me wishes the NC-17 version they had released an unrated cut, and this film, if you look at how films with Johnny Knoxville in them were doing at the time, this probably maybe would have made about $30 million, and it would have done better, and it would have given John Waters like able to make another movie. So I don't blame this movie, which I don't really like, for that. I do like its weird Godard references. I like certain things about it, but it often feels like there's too much going on. You have Selma Blair's character dancing at one point towards the end, and you have these squirrels dancing around, and you have Mink Stoll getting a rim job, and you have like all these crazy sex acts going on all at once. It just feels like it's overwrought with too many things going on with all this sex stuff. And it's not so much the sex stuff, it feels like it's so unfocused. It's like a wacky farce comedy of the 60s. But if you're like, oh well, how many wacky farce sex comedies, like everything you wanted to know about sex but were afraid to ask? But like, that's a movie that like when I saw when I was 13, you go, okay, I saw that, but I kind of forget about it because you remember certain things about it, but you just see it because of the sex, and that's about it. And this film didn't have much value beyond that. It's not one of his cool cult movies that pokes you and makes you go like, are you grossed out yet? Are you grossed out yet? Did that make you throw up? You saw that drag queen eating shit. Are you disgusted yet? And The Dirty Shame is almost like someone who doesn't understand what will offend people anymore, trying to offend them from a very safe position. And that's the only time in his whole filmography I've really felt like he's more out of touch by doing the thing that people said should make him more in touch with their sensibilities, was doing this. And I think it was a really major miscalculation. And certain times when directors go back to doing the thing that we all love them for after years and years of not doing it, but I rarely see it work out the way we want it to. I really think it shows me that sometimes you have to know what you need to do versus what the audience wants you to do. And sometimes you should do what the audience wants you to do, but other times you should know when it's better not to do that. And I think Dirty Shame shows he didn't completely understand that he should not do that at this point. It's sad because I think John Waters always kind of made films that were very John Waters, whether he's working with Johnny Depp and doing a big Hollywood movie or doing Hairspray. And although he's had a unique voice and his unique voice has flowed through all these movies, it just feels like that style fell apart because he's trying to do something that he's kind of moved past and doesn't really understand how to do anymore. You kind of can't do a film he made for, like, I forget how much he made Pink Flamingos for, but I think like craft services on this maybe costs as much as that movie did. And you kind of can't do those gritty movies in like the more Hollywood way. And although you have Johnny Knoxville, who if you shot it in more of a Jackass way, I think that kind of would have worked for it. It kind of is too Hollywood in some ways to get the underground cultish stuff to work. Like stylistically, it's kind of a problem. And it's kind of sad to see that from someone who it's like kind of almost beautiful to see his style truly flourish in the way it has, and someone who is such a unique auteur, to see that kind of auteurism fall apart in the end by almost like John Waters doing John Waters. And although a lot of directors like Spielberg and Fincher and Hitchcock are very good at that, I think the difference is they're not like 10 to 20 years removed from that. And going back and John Waters doing John Waters now, showing like how he wasn't really the same John Waters and he's not really upsetting anyone. It's not this crazy controversial movie at this point. A Dirty Shame feels safe, and it feels safe in that way that everyone's getting unrated DVDs, and these are things he's looking up on the internet, and it just doesn't really do it the same way it used to. It feels dated and it feels safe in what it's trying to do about sex. It doesn't feel controversial and wrong. It feels just kind of like wrong in that way, like why did this filmography have to go to this place? And it feels disappointing, and I'm sad to say all of that, because I really still love John Waters and I loved most of these movies. But I will tell you one thing, I own every John Waters movie except for this one, and I don't think I'm going to change that position based on watching it this time. So if you have seen A Dirty Shame and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to. Check out my John Waters review playlist. I have now reviewed every film John Waters has directed, including a few extras like a review of Homer's Phobia, the Simpsons episode he was on, and footage of me at least across the street from the Cecil B. Demented premiere. I will probably be reviewing Lust in the Dust in the next month or so, and I think maybe an extra John Waters thing, but probably at least just Lust in the Dust. Thank you everyone who's watched this entire series. I really appreciate it. Ever since I came up with this director series where I pick a director and I review every film they ever directed. I always knew I would do John Waters, and it's kind of like a lifelong dream of being a critic to review all his films, from literally the beginning shorts to A Dirty Shame. As much as I didn't like this one, it's really kind of amazing to have done it. So I really want to thank everyone who watched it. Anyone who's a Waters fan who's now checking out my channel, that's really cool. So I still will always treasure these movies, and it's been actually a great thrill of mine to really understand this filmography as much as I have through making these videos. So thank you for watching them, and thank you for supporting me and letting me make this series for all this time.